At the beginning of World War II, Germany confidently dominated the European battlefields, and it seemed that its armored vehicles had no worthy rival. However, everything changed in the summer of 1941 when the Wehrmacht invaded the Soviet Union. The Germans expected a lightning victory, as in Poland or France, but within the first weeks they encountered an unpleasant surprise. In front of them appeared tanks against which German shells were almost powerless. These were the legendary Soviet T-34 and KV-1. These machines had thick sloped armor, powerful armament, and high maneuverability, which made them extremely dangerous opponents for the German Panzer III and Panzer IV, which until then had been considered reliable enough. Wehrmacht officers were shocked. The tanks they had relied on turned out to be practically useless against the new Soviet machines. Reports from the front brought disturbing details. Shells of 37 and 50 mm, used by German tanks and anti-tank guns, literally bounced off the T-34's armor. The situation became critical. Germany's allies, and the German soldiers themselves, told how these Russian ghosts emerged from the morning fog and, ignoring the shots, calmly destroyed entire columns of equipment. In those days, German engineers and strategists realized it was time to create something of an entirely different level, a tank that would not only surpass enemy equipment, but return Germany's strategic advantage. The project of the future Tiger began in an atmosphere of haste and tension. The design bureaus of Henschel and Porsche were tasked with creating a heavy tank capable of penetrating Soviet machines at ranges from which they could not return fire, and withstanding hits from the most powerful shells. But sheer power was not enough. The Germans needed to create a symbol of technological superiority, a machine that would inspire fear by its very appearance. The project was given the green light, and already in 1942 the first prototype appeared, huge, heavy, with thick armor and an incredible for the time 88 mm gun. That same gun had already proven its lethality as part of the Flak 36 anti-aircraft system, capable of destroying tanks at long range. The Tiger was born out of fear and the need to regain lost superiority. It became a response to a challenge Germany had not expected to face. It was a tank created in haste, but with an engineering audacity that can only be admired. It combined power, innovation, and tactical thinking. Its appearance marked a turning point in armored warfare, and the very story of its birth is a vivid reminder of how technology advances under conditions of absolute necessity. The world first saw the power of the Tiger not at a parade and not on a proving ground. It rumbled across the fields of the Leningrad front, leaving behind a mixture of horror, admiration, and confusion. The year was 1942. On the Eastern Front, where tank warfare had become a brutal everyday reality, the German command decided to throw into battle its newest development, intended to turn the tide. It was a moment that was supposed to be a triumph of German engineering, a moment when Soviet soldiers, tightened by fear, would see a machine capable of tearing any armor to shreds. But the debut of the Tiger was not as brilliant as Hitler's headquarters had expected. The first units arrived on the Leningrad front in September 1942 as part of the 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion. It was an experiment, combat testing in difficult terrain, among swamps, forests, and fortified positions. The task was simple: break through the Red Army's defenses, demonstrate a new level of armored strength, and show that German technology was still one step ahead. The Tigers looked impressive, huge, heavy, with mighty 88 mm guns that had previously been used as anti-aircraft weapons and had already proven deadly against tanks. But in real combat, the ideal machine encountered ideal conditions for its failure. Too heavy, too cumbersome, the Tigers bogged down in marshy soil, broke down due to the wet ground, and froze under autumn rains. One of the tanks had barely started moving when the engine overheated, forcing the crew to abandon the machine under enemy fire. Others got stuck up to the turret in the swampy earth and became easy prey for artillery. Soviet troops, initially terrified by the strange massive silhouettes, soon noticed the weaknesses: lack of maneuverability, weak tracks, vulnerability in difficult conditions. For such a tank, open plains were the ideal battlefield, but Leningrad was not the place for a tank dash. Nevertheless, the Tiger's debut was an important psychological moment. Soviet soldiers encountered for the first time a machine whose frontal armor could not be penetrated even by anti-tank guns. In one commander's report it was said that the new German tanks could not be taken by any shells at all. Rumors spread in Red Army units about monsters that fired for kilometers and destroyed with the first hit. The Germans, for their part, saw that the new equipment's potential was enormous, but to unlock it they needed proper employment. The Tiger's real success came in winter, in January 1943 near Kharkov, where it showed itself as its creators had intended. Open plains, deep snow, clear defensive lines and tanks that could lie in ambush, firing at enormous distances at any Soviet machines. There the Tiger lived up to its name, becoming a deadly predator on the battlefield. Its gun destroyed T-34s before they could approach to firing range. Its armor deflected shells, and the powerful engines handled the cold far better than Leningrad's bogs. Despite problems and failures in the first outing, the German army realized it had in its hands not just another tank, a weapon that changed the rules. Tankers began to learn, engineers refined the design, and German propaganda soon presented the Tiger to the world as a symbol of the Reich's military might. The Allies, having learned of its appearance, began looking for ways to counter it. And among the anti-Hitler coalition there emerged a new task: destroy the German beast that threatened to become the king of the battlefield. Thus the Tiger entered history, not immediately, not in triumph, but through struggle, mistakes, and lessons learned. Its debut was not ideal, but it became a crucial starting point in the history of heavy tanks, the moment when technology began to surpass man, and when an iron monster became not just a weapon, but a symbol of the era. When Soviet fighters first saw the Tiger, they spoke of it as a steel fortress on tracks. Its armor seemed impregnable, deflecting even the most accurate shots, and each hit on it seemed only to help the tank understand where the enemy was firing from. And indeed, the Tiger's armor was one of the elements that made it not only a legend of World War II, but a symbol of engineering breakthrough for its time. Unlike many predecessors, its armor was not merely thick, it was thought out down to the smallest detail, combining strength, quality, and an intimidating visual impression. The frontal hull plate 100 mm thick, made of high-quality rolled steel, made the Tiger virtually invulnerable to most anti-tank weapons of the time. Even at close range, T-34s and KV-1s had difficulty penetrating it, and shells that struck at an angle often ricocheted. The turret was also protected by 100 mm in front and 80 mm on the sides, which by the standards of 1942 turned the tank into a mobile bunker. But the importance of the armor lay not only in its thickness, but in the quality standard it met. The Germans used high-strength homogeneous armor steel capable of withstanding repeated impacts without delamination or cracking, which often occurred with lower-quality materials. However, the Tiger's armor was not perfect. It had one serious drawback compared to the Soviet T-34: the armor plates were arranged vertically. That meant that despite their thickness, they were more vulnerable to shape charge or large-caliber rounds hitting at a right angle. Sloped armor, as on the T-34, provided additional protection through ricochet, whereas the Tiger's flat plates absorbed impacts across their surface. But this vulnerability was partly offset by the exceptional precision of assembly, fastening, and metalworking. Even if a shell struck directly at the frontal hull, it required unprecedented penetration to get through. The Tiger's side armor was thinner 80 mm, and it was from the sides that it most often suffered enemy fire. In many battles, Soviet commanders ordered fire aimed at the tracks, since the side armor was weaker and allowed the tank to be disabled without being destroyed. From the front the Tiger was almost invulnerable, but from the sides and rear it was a much easier target. This realization forced German tankers to act cautiously, presenting only the frontal aspect to the enemy and constantly maneuvering to avoid encirclement. Special mention should be made of the crew's internal protection. Inside, the tank had anti-spall coatings that minimized risk to the tankers if the armor was penetrated, as well as special hatches and emergency egress mechanisms. The Germans understood that a heavy tank is not just a machine, but a home on the battlefield, and the lives of those who operated it were no less important than the machine itself. The Tiger's armor became a legend, spawning many myths and exaggerations among the Allies. The number of shells it could withstand was often inflated several times over, and some accounts claimed the tank could survive a direct hit from an aerial bomb. Though the reality was less dramatic, the very fact that men in trenches spoke of the Tiger as an impregnable fortress says a lot. Its armor was one of the key factors that made this tank an icon of world military history. When the Tiger's gun was first discussed, it was not just the next tank weapon being debated. It was like talking about a legend, a mythical weapon that seemed to exist beyond reality. Soldiers who came under its fire said that the Tiger fired at ranges where other tanks could not even see their targets. And those who tried to hide behind the steel bodies of their machines knew one thing: if an 88mm gun was against them, this wasn't a fight, this was a sentence. The Tiger's armament, namely the legendary KWK-36, became the key element that made the tank not only a formidable weapon, but a symbol of engineering superiority that forced the Allies to reconsider the very principles of tank warfare. The KWK-36L/56 was the tank version of the famous 88mm Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun, already proven on the Western Front as a killer of tanks and aircraft. The Germans did not invent something new, they simply mounted a tested, extremely powerful gun on tracks, turning it into a mobile platform of death. The gun could defeat a Soviet T-34 or KV-1 at distances of more than 1.5 kilometers, ranges at which Soviet guns could not even attempt aimed fire. This explains the Tiger's overwhelming superiority in the first serious battles. Where an ordinary tank entered into a shootout, the Tiger had already delivered its first and often final blow. The secret of this gun's lethality lay not only in its caliber, but in the high muzzle velocity of the projectile, about 800,930 meters per second depending on ammunition type. The Tiger's crew had access to a varied range of shells, armor-piercing, subcaliber, high-explosive, all of them top of their class in effectiveness. The subcaliber PZGR-40, for example, could penetrate 150 millimeters of armor at about a kilometer. This meant that there was no Allied tank that could feel safe within the Tiger's reach. One shot and a turret could be torn off, the hull split, the crew annihilated instantly. Yet the gun was not just powerful, it was remarkably accurate. German optics, especially the famous TZF-9B sight, allowed the gunner to detect and defeat targets even in difficult conditions. In open terrain, the Tiger became the king of battle. It could halt, choose a target, fire, and change position before the enemy realized where the shot had come from. No wonder the Allies feared not only the tank but its crew. There were cases when German tankers knocked out more than a dozen vehicles in a single engagement, remaining effectively out of reach. But even this fearsome weapon had its weaknesses. The barrel's great length, almost 5 meters, made the gun vulnerable in urban combat, where mobility and visibility mattered more than range. In confined spaces, the crew had to account for the gun size, which could snag on walls, trees, and even get stuck while turning. Moreover, the rate of fire left something to be desired. An experienced crew could fire 68 rounds per minute, but in intense combat this often dropped due to the need to monitor overheating in mechanism condition. The gun was also extremely expensive to produce. German industry spent significant resources on each barrel, and this expense limited the Tiger's mass deployment at the front. But those that did reach battle changed its course. In one well-known engagement on the Eastern Front, a Tiger under Michael Wittmann's command destroyed an entire column of Soviet tanks before they could open fire. It was neither the first nor the last time when the Tiger's armament proved decisive. The 88mm gun became more than a tank component. A mention of it made Allied mechanics and tankers shudder as they saw the familiar silhouette in their binoculars. It made the Tiger not just a machine, but a weapon of mass psychological impact, and even after it became technically outdated, it remained a symbol of precision, power, and the nimbleness of German armored thought. In the history of tank armament, the Tiger occupies a special place, well earned and sealed in the memory of all who ever saw it shell, like a thunderbolt, smash steel and fates. The Tiger was created as an inexorable force on the battlefield, but behind its formidable appearance lay not only advantages but serious drawbacks, especially when it came to mobility. From the start it was conceived as a heavy tank, able to take a hit and deliver lethal damage at long ranges, and that meant one thing: the machine turned out massive. The Tiger weighed over 57 tons, making it a true giant among most World War II tanks. This mass seriously affected its mobility and ability to operate in difficult conditions. And although its maximum road speed was about 38 km per hour, in real combat it rarely reached even half that figure. One of the main problems was the running gear. For its mass, the Tiger had a fairly capable transmission and a Maybach HL210 engine, later replaced by the 700 horsepower HL230, but even this unusually powerful engine for the time was under enormous load. In rough terrain or poor weather, the tank could move at only 1,015 km per hour, and even then breakdowns were frequent: engine overheating, track breakage, gearbox failures. In especially difficult circumstances, soft ground fronts or marshy terrain, the Tiger simply got stuck. This was not a rarity but practically a rule, well known to its crews. Technical difficulties accompanied the Tiger at every stage of its service. It required not only a highly qualified crew but a whole team of technicians to maintain this complex machine. Minor repairs required time and resources. For intermediate repairs, special equipment or evacuation, and for major overhauls the tank had to be returned to the factory. A simple track replacement could take up to several hours, and under combat conditions it became a deadly risky task. Unlike the T-34, famed for its simplicity and ease of repair, the Tiger was an elite, expensive weapon requiring corresponding care. Logistics became another Achilles heel. Given its veracity, the Tiger consumed about 500 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers on roads and roughly twice that in rough terrain. German supply columns were already under strain, and supplying the Tigers with fuel and ammunition became a real trial, especially during retreats. Tanks left without fuel were often blown up by their crews or abandoned so as not to fall into enemy hands. This not only upset the command's plans but made the tank strategically vulnerable. In addition, the Tiger's size complicated transportation. It could not cross many bridges due to excessive weight, and sometimes special crossings had to be built, slowing advances. On narrow roads the tank had difficulty maneuvering, and in urban areas it became an easy target for infantry anti-tank weapons that could attack from the flanks or rear, where its armor was significantly weaker. It becomes clear that the Tiger was not a universal combat machine. It was deadly when conditions allowed its power to be used. In open spaces, on good roads, within well-tuned formations, there it was king. But in situations where mobility, speed, and the ability to operate in confined spaces were needed, this steel giant proved helpless. It was then that the optimization of Soviet tanks like the T-34 showed its value: their lower weight, better cross-country mobility, and arguably better suitability to the realities of field combat. One could say the Tiger was designed for victory but not for survival in a long war. Its mobility was the idea sacrificed for power. From the standpoint of engineering art it was a masterpiece, but in practice this masterpiece demanded such ideal conditions that the result was often ambiguous. And yet, in those moments when fate gave it the chance to cross the open battlefield, it remained that same terror on tracks, the tank the Allies remembered with a shudder, and which is still considered one of the most impressive examples of combat equipment of its time. When a Tiger appeared on the horizon, it was perceived not as part of war but as the intrusion of something almost supernatural. Where ordinary tanks engaged in exchange of fire, the Tiger entered into psychological combat. Its appearance instilled fear that not only constrained soldiers' actions but undermined the morale of entire units. The enemy knew, if a Tiger had appeared on the battlefield, then before them was not just a machine, it was a monster against which standard tactical techniques might not work. This was a tank possessing not only firepower and armor but an aura of dread. Soviet soldiers imagined Tigers as invincible giants that could not be stopped by artillery, tanks, or aircraft. Tales passed from unit to unit often exaggerated the tank's capabilities many times over, but such transmission of fear did its work. There were cases when infantry, hearing the roar of its engine, abandoned positions without having even seen the tank itself. They expected death, because they knew the 88mm gun penetrates even the most powerful tanks, and the Tiger's armor repels every attempt to destroy it. The Tiger earned this reputation not so much by the number of victories as by the drama with which they were achieved. Even if there were only a few such machines on the field, it felt like dozens. Allied communications on the Western Front showed a similar picture. British and American tankers who faced Tigers in North Africa or Normandy often spoke of them with almost mystical dread. One British Army commander described a battle: "Only 3 Tigers stood against us, but it felt like we fought the entire German army." Even attempts to break its spirit with aircraft did not always help. Infantry still felt vulnerable, for the Tiger could fire at attacking troops at enormous distances, seeming to look straight into the enemy's soul. Within the German army itself, the Tiger's arrival at the front brought a morale boost. It became a symbol of the Reich's technical superiority, and every Wehrmacht soldier believed, if the Tigers are with us, victory will be ours. Often even a rumor that a unit of these machines was nearby made German troops cast aside doubts, strengthen attacks, or hold defense stubbornly. The Tiger became not only an instrument of war, but a moving legend, an idol of military power which, perhaps, could not win the war by itself, but could change the course of battle on a specific sector. The mythology of the tiger grew as the desperation at the fronts increased. It was not uncommon for the enemy to surrender believing heavy tanks were operating against them, when in fact none were present. The sound of the Maybach HL-230 engine, with its characteristic drone, made hearts stop. And the more they talked about the Tiger's invincibility, the less anyone tried to test it. Even if several enemy tanks opposed a single Tiger, infantry often wavered, knowing that the monster had enough time to destroy them one by one. However, behind the myths lay another aspect. The psychological effect was double-edged. German tankers, in turn, understood they were the bearers of a machine from which the impossible was expected. Enormous, sometimes unfounded, hopes were placed upon them. If a Tiger broke down or was lost in battle, it inflicted a moral blow not only on the crew but on nearby units. They faced an impossible task: remain invincible under combat conditions where supply lines collapsed, fuel ran out, and commanders demanded miracles. These tankers became almost priests of their machine, knowing that one wrong move and the entire aura perished with them. The Tiger's psychological impact was immense. It is hard to measure it in kill counts or armor breaches. It is measured in the trembling hands of artillerymen abandoning their guns and in the cold eyes of tank crews going into a knowingly losing fight. This was a monster which, being a perfectly real machine, became more than metal and fire. It became a symbol, a myth, an ensurer of human psychology, and thus left a mark far deeper than many machines that were more numerous or even technically superior. Production of the Tiger became not just a technological challenge but a genuine industrial drama unfolding within the Third Reich, where each tank became an expensive, almost handcrafted product. Unlike mass models such as the T-34 or the M4 Sherman, the German PZKPFW-6 Tiger I was the result of an extremely complex engineering process that required the industry's maximum concentration of resources, skilled labor, and time, things Germany had less and less of with each passing month of the war. Its production began in 1942 at Henschel's Kassel plant, with major German industrial giant Krupp actively participating by manufacturing the turrets and armament. Each Tiger was assembled almost by hand from meticulously finished parts and consisted of more than 26,000 components. Just manufacturing the hull took over 300 hours, and final assembly required about 800 more. The armor plates that made up the hull required special treatment, strict quality control, and precise alignment to ensure strength. Unlike Soviet or American conveyor processes, Tiger production required not just laborers but talented craftsmen and engineers capable of handling the most complex operations. In wartime, such specialists became fewer, some went to the front, others were lost due to Allied bombings. As a result, the Tiger was expensive. According to Germany's War Ministry, a single tank cost about 250,000 Reichsmarks, approximately 2.5 times more than a Panzer IV and more than 6 times the cost of a Soviet T-34. Its production consumed vast amounts of strategic materials, including high-quality steel and rare alloys. This forced Germany to economize in other areas. At a time when it needed mass armaments and armored vehicles to fight on two fronts, a significant share of resources went into creating elite equipment which, despite its power, could not solve the problem of insufficient numbers. During its production run, from August 1942 to August 1944, German factories managed to produce only about 1,350 Tiger I tanks. By comparison, in the same period the USSR produced more than 20,000 T-34s, and the USA about 25,000 Shermans. This number reflects not only technological complexity but strategic errors of the German leadership. The bet was placed on a high-quality but extremely complicated weapon that could not be produced in sufficient quantities. A cultural rift arose in the army. Some regiments were equipped with Tigers and felt like the elite, others suffered from tank shortages and had to fight with outdated models. Another serious problem was production vulnerability. Factories producing Tiger components were repeatedly bombed by Allied aviation, slowing progress and increasing defective output. There were cases when tanks were sent to the front not fully supplied or with shortages of spare parts, dangerous practices that led to rapid breakdowns. German troops received tanks without adequate stocks of spare track links, filters, and sometimes even with unfinished cooling systems. And yet, despite all the shortcomings, Tiger production became a symbol of the extreme strain on Germany's war industry. This was a tank created by the best minds with the best materials, a machine believed to be a savior on the battlefield. It remained expensive, rare, and did not justify itself as a weapon for mass offensive operations, but it became an icon whose very existence speaks to how far Germany was willing to go for technological superiority. When you stand before a tiger, it's easy to believe this steel monster is almost a perfect weapon. But ideals rarely live in reality, and this tank had plenty of weak points that the Allies and the Germans themselves learned to exploit as the war went on. Weight and construction come first and most obvious. At more than 57 tons, the Tiger was so heavy that many bridges and crossings could not carry it, and mud, thaw, and marshy areas turned the pride of the Wehrmacht into an immobile chest. Even with a working engine and transmission, its real speed in field conditions dropped drastically, and the slower it moved, the easier it became to surround and strike at its sides and rear. The running gear and tracks, under such mass, experienced enormous loads, broken track links, torsion bar failures, and gearbox breakdowns became normal, especially with intensive use without proper servicing. At the same time, evacuating a disabled Tiger was extremely problematic. You needed powerful towing, a resource rarely found on the battlefield. Tanks were often abandoned or blown up by their own crews to keep them from the enemy. Armor protection, impressive on the front of the hull and turret, had its gaps. The side and rear plates were significantly thinner, and flanking attacks, shots at the tracks and suspension could quickly disable the tank without penetrating its frontal armor. Shaped charges and specialized subcaliber shells of the Allies and Soviets made things clear. The Tiger was magnificent at range and in a frontal duel, but vulnerable in close combat and in dense urban environments, where the long gun hindered maneuvering and made aiming and target switching slower. Another serious vulnerability lay in the ammunition stowage and interior layout. A hit into the fighting compartment could detonate the shells, often destroying the hull and crew instantly. Fire suppression and anti-spall measures existed but did not always save the tank under direct hits. Logistics and operation were a separate vulnerability. High fuel consumption, maintenance complexity, and a shortage of spare parts made these machines rationalized achievements that could not be sustained in a long campaign. On the Eastern Front's stretched supply lines or after air raids on parts plants, Tigers quickly lost combat readiness. Their production was expensive and inefficient in terms of mass. Losses were replaced very slowly, and each loss was keenly felt. The equipment required highly qualified crews. Training such commanders and mechanics took time, and personnel losses reduced maintenance and tactical effectiveness. Tactics against the Tiger were soon worked out: concentrated fire by several anti-tank guns at the flanks and running gear, use of mines and ambushes, changing engagement distances, employing aircraft and artillery to disable or block it, as well as the appearance of more powerful anti-tank guns in heavy Allied tanks. In cities and narrow spaces, the Tiger lost its advantage. Tight quarters made it a predictable target where infantry with anti-tank grenades and Molotov cocktails could effectively neutralize the formidable machine. And finally, the psychological factor. The miracle expectations placed upon the Tiger put pressure on its crews. If the machine failed, the moral damage was significant, and the reputation for invincibility that inspired fear in the enemy eroded with frequent breakdowns and abandonments. Taken together, the Tiger's vulnerabilities show the classic heavy weapon dilemma: outstanding in one dimension, armor, firepower, but paying a price in another, mobility, reliability, logistics. Where terrain, supply, and tactics allowed its strengths to be used, the Tiger was almost impregnable. But at the slightest change of conditions, it turned from king of the battlefield into an expensive burden vulnerable to competent, coordinated enemy action. Today, decades after the last shot, the Tiger remains not just a page of history. He stands apart, living in myths, films, games, and in the minds of those interested in military technology. The legacy of this tank is like a huge shadow cast by a machine that was rare and complex, yet left a mark disproportionate to its actual contribution to the war. The Tiger became synonymous with German engineering might of World War II, as well as a symbol of the fear and respect evoked by a weapon epitomizing the technological limits of its time. A few Tigers have survived in museums and at military parades around the world, and each is the star of the show. The most legendary is Tiger 131, the only surviving tank still capable of running. It is in the Tank Museum in Bovington, UK, and when it is taken out onto the field, thousands come to see the steel colossus born 80 years ago come to life. This tank has become a true artifact, a subject of study not only for historians but for engineers trying to understand how Germany managed to build such a complex and impressive machine under total war conditions. The Tiger's legacy lives on in popular culture. It became a famous character of the book and film Fury starring Brad Pitt, where its image fought American Shermans in one of the most dramatic tank battle scenes. And in games, from World of Tanks to War Thunder, the Tiger holds a place of honor, an object of gamers' desire, for those who can gather the resources or spend dozens of hours grinding. Even if in these games it is sometimes not the fastest or best protected, its image, silhouette, and the simple fact that it is a tiger already command respect. The iconic perception of the tiger arose in part thanks to wartime German propaganda. It was turned into an almost super weapon capable of turning the tide of battle. This image took root so deeply that even today many are convinced the tiger was invincible, though historical data show that each tiger faced dozens of allied tanks that overwhelmed it with numbers and tactics. It was perceived as a rare but decisive force. In this it resembles a late medieval knight in armor, magnificent in single combat, but useless against a musket-armed infantry line. And yet the tiger had something that made it more than just a machine. It became a cultural and even philosophical phenomenon. It seems to embody a choice, incredible power, but hypertrophied, poorly applicable in the real, ever-changing world. Like many weapons of the Third Reich, it became a monument to the idea of qualitative superiority, a weapon created to win a single ideal battle, not a long, practical war of attrition. Technically, the Tiger became the forefather of new concepts of heavy tanks and armored vehicles. Its experience influenced the development of the King Tiger, Tiger II, and then post-war tanks like the British Conqueror or the Soviet IS-3, which adopted the idea of a supertank with thick armor and a powerful gun. But these machines did not become mass-produced, and their role in history remained largely symbolic. The Tiger's legacy is a reminder that technology in war carries not only functionality but psychological and symbolic power. Anyone who has seen a tiger in person has seen more than metal, power, danger, the striving for perfection and tragedy, since all of this was directed at war, destruction, death. It became a legend born of humanity and its eternal struggle between creation and annihilation. And perhaps that is why it still lives in metal, in memory, in games, in books as the eternal beast of war, admired, feared, and never forgotten. The Tiger tank long ago stepped beyond purely military history and became a genuine cultural phenomenon, embodying power, monumentality, and the inevitability of war. Its appearance in popular culture has become an integral part of how modern generations perceive World War II. Of all the tanks of that era, it was the Tiger that received the most attention from cinema, literature, and of course video games. It became not just an element of the plot, it became a sign of the epic, a symbol of total war, of irresistible force, albeit sometimes doomed. Perhaps one of the brightest recent examples of the Tiger on screen is the film Fury, 2014, starring Brad Pitt. There the Tiger acts as an antagonist, terrifying like a predator from the fog, entering a deadly duel with the film's hero commanding a Sherman. The battle scene featuring a single tiger, which not only looks distinct but effectively plays a role as a character, says a lot. Even in 2014 audiences perceived this tank as soldiers did in 1944, with a sense of fear before an almost mythical enemy. Moreover, the film used the real, running Tiger 131 from Bovington, a unique occurrence for cinema, underscoring the deep respect directors and historians have for this technology. In video games, the Tiger is no less iconic. Fans of tank battles in World of Tanks, War Thunder, and Call of Duty see in it not just a machine with stats, but a legend. Game versions often highlight its strengths: a powerful gun, high survivability, and an intimidating look. Anyone spending time in these virtual worlds knows, meeting a tiger on the battlefield is a challenge that tests your strategic thinking, readiness, and ability to act under pressure. Interestingly, in games it's often chosen not for efficiency but for the image, for the silhouette, the history, the feeling that you're controlling something truly great. In literature and documentary, the tiger has also become a major topic of discussion. Books, memoirs, even encyclopedias consider it not simply as a machine but as a symbol of the all-or-nothing ideology characteristic of Hitler's Germany. Comparisons with mythical beasts, the story of its creation, analyses of the successes and failures of its use, all this has created an entire cultural universe in which the tiger is not just a tank, but the center of narratives about war, engineering, and human overconfidence. Full-scale replicas of the tank are often found in museums, at exhibitions, and at historical battle reenactments. For many viewers, such displays become a personal encounter with the legend, the moment when the book or screen image turns into real metal. Even those far from military technology feel a kind of primal reaction at the sight of the tiger's hull: respect, anxiety, curiosity. Its shape, tracks, the turret's position, everything speaks of functionality and deadly power forged by human hands. Thus, the tiger's presence in culture is not just a tribute to historical accuracy. It is a reflection of how humanity has reinterpreted war through images. The tiger became not only a military icon but a cultural symbol that absorbed both technology and tragedy, brilliance and delusions of one of the most destructive eras. And so it continues to live in cinema, games, museums, books, and in the memory of everyone who has ever heard the legend of the indestructible steel beast that crossed the fields of World War II.